The most fundamental reason is economic. Wind and solar are now significantly cheaper than coal, gas, and oil in a lot of markets around the world. And so if you've got this as the cheapest form of energy, if you let economics decide, that's what's going to get built. And at the moment, we're seeing record growth of wind and solar around the world. And so these problems are coming down the line where you need to be able to solve the variability issue of wind and solar.
Welcome. This is Phil Michaels, Forbes 30 Under 30 entrepreneur and performance coach. Forbes names the top 30 entrepreneurs, leaders, and stars in the world. And each week, we bring you one of them to help you level up in your life and business. From celebrities like LeBron James to Kylie Jenner and Cardi B, you're sure to learn from the list. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now it's time to level up. Level up. Level up. Welcome to Phil with Forbes 30 podcast. Today we have a very special guest. He is recognized in the energy industry as an influencer and leader in the market. He uses his platform to speak out on the importance of accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy, including at TED conferences, the United Nations, One Young World, and even Forbes summits in recent years. He had a role in developing the 10 megawatt Kilroot Energy Storage Array, the first utility-scale commercial battery energy storage project in Europe, and one of the largest systems in the world at the time. He is a founder of energy storage tech powerhouse, Fluence, which designs energy storage using batteries to help integrate renewable energy to the grid. Backed by two of the energy industry giants, AES and Siemens, they are ranked the #1 leading energy storage integrator by all major analysts, including Bloomberg. This might be Elon Musk's biggest competitor because they even have more market share than Tesla. Please welcome my very special guest, Marek.
Hey, Phil. How's it going?
Very excited to have you here. It's such a pleasure to be able to reconnect with you. Welcome to the show. Marek and I have been on several trips together internationally and just most recently in Berlin, Germany together, hanging out, getting to go to speakeasies, having an amazing, amazing time at the Forbes event. It's so good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. It's a great way to reconnect. So I'm looking forward to it.
Where were you when you first found out you made the Forbes list?
Good question. I'm not sure I remember. I remember getting the email. I remember the moment of excitement, but I actually don't remember where I was. I think the reason that it doesn't jump out at me is I wasn't actually, when I got it, I wasn't clear that I was on the list. Like the email I got was like, hey, you're on the short list, which I thought meant, you know, the long list for the under 30 lists. And it turned out to actually be the list itself. So it was sort of anticlimactic until I went to the launch event in London. And I was asking, okay, so when do they announce the ones that made the list? So they're like, no, you're on it. I was like, oh, okay, cool.
That's amazing. So you didn't find out till you're actually at the event. You're rubbing elbows and chatting with other Forbes listers, and you're like, oh, I'm actually on the list too.
Yeah, I was turning up and planning the two scenarios of like, happy face and clapping for those that made it, or what I was going to do if I found out I was on it. But it turned out that was not a necessary step.
Okay, so out of everyone so far I've interviewed, this is the first time this has happened. That's hilarious. Who was the first person you shared it with once you found out? Because it's such a proud moment.
Again, I'm not sure. It was probably my girlfriend. I would have either immediately texted or called her. That is... Again, I don't remember because the moment was a blur because I didn't think I had it until I turned up. But that's I think the first person I spoke to about it.
That's awesome. Congratulations. And take us back to the very beginning, Marek, where you grew up, where you're from, and what ultimately led you to the path you're on now, making it to the Forbes list.
Sure. So I'm a second generation immigrant, Polish by parentage. So my mom's from Poland, but I grew up in the UK and was in the Midlands of England near Nottingham. So sort of coal mining community mostly, just sort of regular schooling and so on. I always had an interest in engineering. And my dad and my granddad both were civil structural engineers. So actually that's what I always thought I was going to go and do. I went to university, I got a master's in engineering, and then I got a job. Like one of the scholarships that I had through university also gave me a job placement after I finished. And this was when I graduated back in 2009. And as I graduated, it was, as you perhaps recall, the height of the recession. And one of the first things that I did in my illustrious career was get fired from the job that I was about to start. They called me up and said, yeah, the economy's bad. We're actually not able to take anyone on anymore. We're sorry. So really interesting way to start your career, but one that I actually really recommend because it gave me, that was one of the moments that let me pivot to a completely different direction. And, as a result of that, I started looking at some of the other things that interested me. And I went through some of my old supervisors at university for looking at PhD programs. And I wanted to do something in sustainability always, but specifically in, at that time, sustainability in construction. So, sustainable homes, things like that. And I found a few different placements, a few different opportunities. But the one that I ended up applying for and was really interested in, I got called up and told, hey, it's filled before you applied to us. But we've got this other one, this other engineering doctorate, which is like an industry-based PhD that's available. And we think you'd be a really good fit. Would you be interested in learning more? It was a bit of a tangential angle, because basically the opportunity was to work on some of the challenges associated with integrating renewable energy to the grid. So my industry mentor and supervisor, who's the one that really pitched it to me, I was going in there expecting not to think too much of it, but he sold it to me. Like, he was like, this is the most important thing you could be working on, because essentially energy is fundamental to absolutely everything in society. Without it, we don't have a civilization, really. And you need to understand what's happening in the energy space, this move towards 100% sustainable energy, and what that's going to mean for the existing electricity system, the existing energy system as we know it. So I ended up moving in that direction. I did a PhD, essentially researching that exact topic. What are the challenges associated with getting towards a fully renewable energy-based electricity system and away from fossil fuels? And essentially that led into energy storage and into one of the missing pieces that is needed to help solve the challenge of the fact the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. So that is essentially how I got involved in energy storage, and that is what I was recognized for on the list, developing the first commercial battery storage project in Europe. Because before that, there had only been sort of academic projects or pilot projects funded by the taxpayer, and it was a bit of a catalyst then to the whole growth of the energy storage market in Europe, which has really taken off in the last few years.
That's incredible. And it sounds like you had so many opportunities where it could have led to a completely different trajectory in your life. And then one simple conversation with a pivotal person in your life led to where you are now. That's incredible. And it sounds like you can share how this works. Because I know someone in the audience that might not be as savvy with energy. How does it work for the layman? Can you explain? Because I know they might be thinking, well, how does renewable energy connect to the grid? And what does that mean for me at home?
Yeah, sure. So if you take it right back to fundamentals, like electricity is generated by one of a number of different sources. So you can burn a fuel, so coal, gas, oil, and by burning it, you turn basically a large turbine, which turns a generator, which makes electricity. And the electricity bit that you generate has to be consumed, or historically has always had to be consumed in real time. So the amount of electricity that everyone is using perfectly matches the amount that's being generated. So in the US, that's at 60 hertz. So and in the UK, it's 50 hertz. So basically, the two have to be entirely balanced. If you have more supply than demand, the frequency starts going up. And if you have more demand than supply, it starts dropping. And it's really, really finely balanced. If it goes more than a couple of hertz above or below the target, the whole grid would either collapse and you'd have a complete grid blackout. Everything would would stop working. Essentially, you would have a complete failure. It's called a black start situation, or you'd have massive overvoltage event where all the lights would like explode and burn out, fuses would bust and so on. So you have to balance the two, and that's been relatively straightforward in the past because you have fossil fuels which you can store up and control, and so providing the supply and to meet the demand is relatively straightforward. But then we've got two big problems with that. One, fossil fuels are finite; they're running out. They won't last forever. By definition, they're unsustainable forms of energy. And second is, of course, climate change and climate crisis. So aside from one trend, which means you need to move and find other sources of energy anyway, the second is we have to do that very quickly because of essentially the need to reduce our emissions as quickly as possible, which basically burning fossil fuels is a very large contributor towards. So that leaves you with renewable technologies. So by that I mean there's a lot of different classes. The big two that are mostly talked about are wind and solar, because they are now the cheapest forms of electricity generation, bar none, in most places around the world. And both of them are variable in different ways. The sun is quite predictably variable. It's there in the day and it's not at night. And in Florida, I'm guessing it's pretty straightforward like that most of the time. In somewhere like Amsterdam,
yeah, we love that sun. That's definitely true. But you're right. At nighttime, still goes away.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's your best case scenario with solar, where you have like clear skies every day, which some places do. But if you take the Netherlands or where I'm living in Amsterdam or in the UK, it's a lot more variable even within the day as you get clouds and things interrupting the amount of power flow. So there's both variability and an erraticness to the amount of supply you get from, for instance, solar. And it's the same with wind. So if you want to move to a system where you have 100% renewable energy, you need to figure out how you deal with that imbalance, because in real time, you're never going to have exactly the right amount of wind and solar to match your demand unless you have something that can act as a buffer to help balance it. So that at a very simple level is what you need to do to be able to balance the grid if you're moving towards the system that is entirely driven by renewable
if
energy.
I'm understanding correctly, basically oil, gas, and coal is this antiquated energy we're still using. It's not sustainable. It's going to run out. And it also has byproducts that are the emissions that are harmful for our atmosphere, for our climate, for our health. And what we're trying to do here is move to something more sustainable, more renewable, and doesn't have as many harmful emissions or at all. And those two main ways that people are focusing on is wind and solar. And the problem with wind is it's too variable. Sun's a little bit more predictable, but still variable. And so what you're saying is when we do have good sun and good wind, we're going to store that. So when we do need it, it's already accessible and it's already readily available.
Yeah, essentially exactly that. With the one additional point, which is largely not, I think, recognized still at the moment, is that already, aside from the the reasons that you mentioned there, that fossil fuels, there's good reasons not to burn them from a pollution standpoint and from a scarcity standpoint. There's still hundreds of years of these resources, so it's not that they're immediately running out. But the most fundamental reason is economic. Wind and solar are now significantly cheaper than coal, gas, and oil in a lot of markets around the world. And so if you've got this as the cheapest form of energy, if you let economics decide, that's what's going to get built. And at the moment, we're seeing record growth of wind and solar around the world. And so these problems are coming down the line where you need to be able to solve the variability issue of wind and solar.
And what that means for the end user, such as me in my house, means my electric bill will be cheaper per month?
Essentially, yes. Although it's just structured differently, because the marginal cost of generating electricity from wind and solar is zero, right? Once you've built a solar farm or you built a wind turbine, when the wind's blowing, there's no fuel, right? It's free. You don't pay anything for it. So the wholesale costs of your electricity come way down, but you still need the whole infrastructure around how you get the electricity from the solar farm, from the wind turbine to your house. And that requires transmission lines, distribution lines, so basically cables carrying electricity. And those costs actually, so whilst you might end up actually having electricity free or very, very close to free, because once you've got all this energy being generated, it's not costing anything. You've got the initial fixed costs, and then you've got the whole, if you can call it, distribution infrastructure to get electricity to the houses. And that is something that you also need to put in place, and those costs go up. So the two sort of balance out, but it's not quite as simple as to say that
because you not only need the solar farm to collect the sun's energy, you not only need the wind turbine to collect the wind's energy, but you now need the infrastructure to bring that energy from the solar farm and the turbine to your house. And currently, I'm assuming because electric in the current form has been here for so many years, the infrastructure is already in place for us to exist on the current and reside on the current electric system based on fossil fuels.
Exactly. But this is the beautiful bit. This is where the energy storage projects that we work on come in, because they solve essentially each of the key challenges that you need, like every single one of the sort of segments that you need to help integrate renewable energy. So one is the infrastructure piece, and that's challenging because essentially the way that power lines are built, they're built to the peak, like the maximum amount of load that a line will carry. And you can imagine that was sensible in the days where you have fossil fuel power plants running constantly at a fixed amount, or a nuclear power plant running at a constant amount. Whereas again, wind and solar, they're going to be variable. There's times where you're using the full capacity of a line, and the time where it's less windy and you're not going to use it. But this is where you can put in batteries, renewable energy storage, to basically manage those lines and make sure that they're effectively being used all the time, because anything that's going to be used above the capacity of the line, you store it up. And then if it's ever below the capacity of the line, you can export, and just essentially it ensures that the system's being used as efficiently as possible to transport energy from where it's being made to where you consume it and where you're using it.
That's a great insight. That it sounds like you target every step of the way. You make it easy for people to do this. And what would be a reason that we're not doing this? I'm assuming the main reason is because the big oil companies have lobbyists that are, and you and I talked about this in Germany and Amsterdam, where a lot of people think certain political regimes don't believe in climate change. It's like, well, no, of course they do. They just want to, they're paid more money by the lobbyists than the, let's say, the renewable energy sources, because they're at risk of losing a lot of money, right? So I'm assuming that's one barrier to entry. Can you share more about that, and what do we need to do to overcome these barriers to entry to make sure we're getting renewable energy?
Sure. And what you outline is, it's part of the challenge. I think one of the biggest issues is actually just an awareness issue, if nothing else. Because actually, I mean, the energy storage industry is growing extremely quickly. It's projected to get from, I think 2018, there was, just to give some context, 9 gigawatts of energy storage, battery energy storage installed in the world. 9 gigawatts is already a lot, but bearing in mind it's global. So 9 gigawatts is 9 billion watts. So a light bulb in your house, if it's an LED, is like 1 watt. So 9 billion energy bulbs is the capacity of the storage that was installed in 2018. And that might sound like a big number, but that's nothing. That's peanuts. Where we're getting to by 2040, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and the trajectory of growth for storage because of the growth of renewables, is to over a terawatt of battery energy storage in the world. So then that is, I don't even know, it'd be 1,000 billion watts in 20 years. So it's like 100 times growth rate effectively in 20 years. So it's an absolutely phenomenal exponential curve, and that capacity is what what we're seeing, and what at Fluence essentially we're doing, helping build out, like designing and installing these systems for various like utility customers around the world.
So are we going to have to still have these power lines? I mean, to me, they look so old school. I mean, you have these big poles coming up out of the ground with wires. Is there a new way that we can do it? It's maybe a little bit more environmentally friendly. And
Oh man, there's like three different ways to answer this, and maybe I'm going to try all three of them, but just very quickly. So one, where you have an existing electricity grid already, it makes sense to use it, right? So if you built the infrastructure, you may as well just make as best use of it as possible. But what you will see less of, I think, is building more power lines, because instead you'll just put in batteries, which are a lot quicker to build, a lot less contentious, so we say. Like, no one likes planning lines being built, but like if you an energy storage system can be in a container, it can be in a building, so it looks pretty innocuous. It's just like a warehouse. So you can put them anywhere, you can build them much faster, and they do effectively the same job. They're like virtual power lines, effectively. So that's one thing. The second is in places where you don't have grid infrastructure. And so I think a fascinating market is sub-Saharan Africa. Huge demand and growth for energy, but it's the same sort of thing as skipping a technology generation. Like, they went straight for avoided landline phones, went straight to mobile phones, cellular, wireless, distributed networks. Same sort of thing with renewables and storage. You can see entirely off-grid systems being built with, wind, solar, batteries, maybe something else for longer term backup. And currently the most economic thing for that is like diesel generators, but ultimately you can get longer duration forms of storage, things like hydrogen, if you wanted to get to a completely clean, isolated unit. And then that won't necessarily be connected. You just have lots and lots of local pockets that are completely separate from each other. And then the third, just to throw it out there, the whole electricity grid that was built was, built 200 odd years ago, and it hasn't changed a great deal since then. Like, Edison's grid is what we have. Currently it runs on AC power, so alternating current. Batteries are actually what are called direct current, DC power. So if you had like your high school chemistry set with the battery, the light bulb, and the two wires, that's DC power. You could build a DC power grid instead of an AC power grid. So if you did want to build a new one, you could build it in a completely new way, and there would be some advantages of doing that. But those are basically the three different ways that you could do it. You could either reimagine the grid, you can use what you have, or you could avoid building one at all and you just have like local power.
So does that mean, because I know we still have issues with traveling to London, for example, from the US, or traveling to sub-Saharan Africa, where I have to get an adapter, I have to get all these different cables and plugs. Is this going to change?
Well, I think that remains to be seen, because that relies on government cooperation and there being essentially everyone agreeing on a certain standard. And I think the large part of, if you look why plug sockets are the way that they are, they closely follow, I guess, colonial power. And like, where there was an empire, most of the former British Empire tends to use British plug sockets for some reason. Right, it's that's kind of what's driven it. So if there was global political alignment around like what an individual plug socket might look like, then possibly. That would be a different question.
Interesting. So thinking of the other companies in this space, I mean, when I think here in the US, we think of Vivint Solar, Ion Solar, Tesla. How do these companies interact with you? Are they the competitors? I mean, what are you doing differently than Tesla, for example?
Sure. So essentially, Fluence designs, installs, and delivers large-scale battery energy storage. That's what we do as a company. And a few things, I guess, differentiate us. Like, first of all, we don't do anything else. Like, we're solely an energy storage tech company. That's all we do. So we don't have any alternative business lines or competing priorities. We just do this one particular task, and particularly at a utility scale. So very large-scale energy storage. So in terms of customers, there are the kind of companies that you mentioned, Vivint, they're more the like residential scale or commercial industrial scale. We're working really at the utility scale, which is very large, either utilities, producers of power, what are called IPPs, independent power producers, or developers. So people who develop projects, basically get land, get a grid connection, so somewhere to plug into the grid, finance a business case, and then they want to purchase an energy storage system because it basically makes sense for that particular application, that use that they have. So large utilities, like for instance, in California, we have a lot of projects that we've done for various customers. San Diego Gas and Electric, for instance. So it's those types of customers that that we'd be selling to. Tesla would be a direct competitor of ours. So they would, they also have a similar, business in the sense they sell energy storage systems. The difference is, I guess, in terms of approach. They're very vertically integrated. So they have their gigafactory in Nevada. They make battery cells. They put the whole systems together, and then they sell them. So it's like a vertical model. It's like an iPhone model, I guess you could say. Like they design all the bits and put it together. We take a sort of horizontal approach, a capital light approach. So we have a platform and an architecture that's a lot more customizable. So we don't make batteries ourselves. We have a number of large scale partners that we're using as a supplier, and that means that we can pick between them the best battery chemistry for a specific task, because there's a whole bunch of different types of battery chemistry. Some are better for some applications and durations, for instance, because not all of these batteries have the same capacity. You could be storing energy for 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours. So we're deliberately not placing a bet on the battery chemistry so that we retain the optionality to switch and take advantage of whatever best technology breakthroughs there are. So that's predominantly how we're different. We deliberately take the approach of not making a bet on a specific type of chemistry. Or
makes sense. And your ideal client could be, like you said, San Diego's electric company, or like we call this Tampa Electric Company, TECO. They might be an ideal client or customer of yours, or a developer who's maybe building a new high rise or a development project that's looking for an energy system. They can contact you. And how would they, let's say someone's listening and they're interested in this, where would they go to find out more, to see if they're a potential customer?
Sure. So the best place to go is the website, which is fluenceenergy.com. And there's a landing page there. It sort of sets out all of the different things that we do, which really falls into 3 categories, which is basically storage replacing generation, storage replacing transmission, so poles and wires, and then storage for large energy users. So if there are, large, whatever it is, steel mills, car plants, things like that have very large energy bills, megawatts of power consumption, we do projects of that sort of size as well. We don't do so much, so we don't do anything in residential storage, and we don't do anything at the smaller, so what would be sub megawatt market, so hundreds of kilowatts of power, which is mostly like what I guess most offices and businesses would be. So we don't have that segment. Well,
you heard it first. If you are looking for energy, forget the Red Bull and contact Marek at Fluence Energy. This is a real energy. You're getting that. But I don't know if Elon did this, but Tesla, if they didn't do this, it's genius, because they built the brand first. Because energy is not really that sexy, right? I mean, the day-to-day work that you're doing might not sound as sexy to the average Joe, but Tesla built a brand like, oh wow, look at these cool new cars that everybody's gonna want. So that way, when they do release a battery or energy storage, you're like, oh, I already know that brand. So if I go to choose between XYZ or Tesla, the brand recognition is already there with Tesla. I don't know if they did this on purpose. I'm assuming it was a strategy, because they wanted to see how can we get the average Joe interested in using energy at a different level.
Yeah, they do, and they're extremely good at that sort of model, and it works really well in this B2C environment. So where you have and consumers, the average Joe, as you say, you can see the idea of the Tesla home, right? Like you have the car that's electric, the battery in the house, the solar roof tiles. It makes sense as a product company, and where brand recognition matters. It's the same sort of thing with Fluence. So Fluence was formed. We launched 1st of January 2018. So we're only about 2.5 years old as a company. But we came together. I would be more of what you would describe as an intrapreneur as opposed to an entrepreneur. I was when I finished my PhD, I worked for AES, which is like a Fortune 500 energy company in the US. And the energy storage business started actually in the US a few years before I got involved. But I was part of essentially establishing, I was the second person in Europe, Middle East, Africa. So establishing our European business and scaling that and growing it to where it is now. We're now a joint venture. So AES spun out the energy storage business and joined forces with Siemens. So Siemens is obviously a huge brand name as well for all sorts of different products. And particularly in the power grid, like they're a very, very well-known name. So it's the same sort of thing. There's a brand presence of being a Siemens company, and that's recognized, but in a more narrow sense. It's not necessarily by the average member of the public, but in the utility space, that is a quality brand. So
that makes sense.
Same idea, but at a different segment, I guess.
And you can leverage that. Hey, this is our current partner, current customer, to get new customers or new partners. I mean, how did you rise so quickly at such a young age in the energy space? It's unbelievable how fast you were able to move up the ranks and then start your own company. How did you find success?
I would say it's predominantly a series of mixture of hard work and good fortune. I should clarify in terms of the way Fluence was launched. So I'm a founding member, but I wouldn't be a founder in the sense, I guess, that you might think, because when we launched as Fluence, we launched pretty strongly. Like we started with 100 people.
Wow.
Or just under. So like in terms of like backing, we were extremely well set up and supported. Our leadership and our I guess original founders started this business back in 2006 within AES. So it'd been going for a number of years, but really it's been since 2018 and the launch of Fluence that we set ourselves up for this like rocket growth. Like when we launched, I think combined between the two companies that came together, had maybe 400 megawatts of projects under our belt, either operational or contracted. And we're now somewhere close to 2 gigawatts, so 2,000 megawatts. So in 2 years, thereabouts, we've quadrupled our backlog. And that's a backlog that was previously developed over 10 years or so, right? So in 2 years, we've done 4 times what we've done in 10. It's that sort of trajectory. So yeah, although I was in early, I want to just sort of make it clear of my, the nature of my involvement.
You still rose very quickly, though. I mean, it's unbelievable. I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. You're being modest. But when you think of you personally, what do you think was the single most important attribute that maybe got you to the point you are now, rising so quickly in the energy space?
Single attribute is probably tenacity. It's just having a relentless interest in a topic. And I had a lot of different directions in front of me at various stages in my career. So one was, as I mentioned, right back when I finished my first master's degree, and that one was a complete roll of the dice. It was like a random thing that occurred to me and shunted me onto a completely different path that I think is a lot more interesting and rewarding. And I'm actually very grateful for that, but it wasn't something that I guess was directly in my control. The second was when I finished the doctorate, because at that stage I could have gone, and I was considering I had feet in 3 camps: academic pursuits, become a professor basically in the same sort of topic, go into politics and basically shaping policy, or go into industry and try and catalyze growth that way. And I chose that path because I saw it as the most immediately relevant, challenging, and rewarding to try and build something myself, as opposed to the sort of academics telling other people, oh, hey, we've invented this thing, now go launch it. And politics is sort of about trying to create a runway so that people do the right thing in the right direction. But the thing that I guess gave me that opportunity was two sort of additional mentors. So one I've already mentioned was a guy called Chris Hunt, and he was the one that supervised me through my PhD and sold me on the vision. That's what led me into working into actually a power station, a fossil fuel power station, and I got to sort of see the inner workings of an energy company and all of the aspects of that, how a coal power station actually runs, its strengths, its weaknesses. And there was, I guess, 2 aspects to that. One, when you're inside a business, I think it's far easier to try and change a business from the inside, grow into a position of influence and leadership to change the course.
And you're
Whereas
directly witnessing the weaknesses and the gaps that need to be fulfilled.
yeah, and because also within a company, if you shape it from the inside, it doesn't feel like it's an attack, right? Like you've got the, they say the Greenpeace model, right? Greenpeace will attack Shell and Chevron and Schlumberger and sort of all these companies, and rightly so in many cases. But at the same time, it doesn't always have, the desired effect. If you work for those companies, you feel attacked. Whereas if you're on the inside of that type of organization and can help move it in, shift its strategy. That was sort of my thinking.
You could be an entrepreneur rather than an entrepreneur, having that entrepreneurial mindset, but within the company, using the financial capital, the human capital, the resources you have at your expenditure. But a lot of companies need to give you that environment, right? To be entrepreneurial minded. Some companies don't even offer that.
Yeah, and that was one of the really fantastic things about AES is that they had that sort of space for incubation, and then they saw that actually once it had grown to a certain point that they weren't the best placed themselves to take it on, because it's a Fortune 500 company. They're very large, as you said. Resources are fantastic, but because there's hierarchy, there's decision making. It's slow. So the idea to spin us out into a separate company with our own P&L, our own mission, mandate, and so on, but still give us those resources and then just let us fly and grow was a really interesting, way of launching a business, because it bypasses a lot of the challenges that a traditional entrepreneur would face, having to chase money every day and find a way of establishing.
It seems like a lot of companies are taking this route where they're creating these little startup-like environments for a spin-off company to grow, but it's still under the umbrella.
Yeah, exactly.
So if someone was listening and they want to get into this industry, knowing what you know now from your journey, what advice would you give them?
I'm going to pull a quote, and I think this is a double quote because I love the US Office, but skate to where the puck is going to be, which is, I think, Wayne Gretzky and Michael Scott. It's easy to sort of say, if you want to get into the industry, look at what's going on now. But I think you have to look at the next step. Like, what is the next problem to solve, the next gap to fill? And if I were, I guess, advising myself now, going back, at the start of my career, what's the next problem to solve? So battery energy storage solves most of the challenges associated with getting to 100% renewables, but it doesn't solve all of them. One of the key limitations is batteries are very good for hours of storage, but if you need days, weeks, or seasons, which you do, ultimately, if you want to get to a wholly sustainable electricity system, like it's windier in the winter than the summer, it's sunnier in the summer than the winter, but they don't quite average out perfectly. So there are new technologies that are needed to fill that gap. That it's really to get the last 20% out of the grid. Getting to 80% renewable energy is, I don't want to, understate it, but it's actually pretty easy. Like, you might see it as a very, very steep growth curve and a challenge, but actually getting to 80% is not that hard. Getting the last 20% of fossil fuel generation off the grid and replaced requires a new technology. So I guess that would be my tip. It would be to find what the gap, what the promising breakthrough is that you need to get on to that full journey of fully sustainable energy.
There you go. You have the secrets now at your disposal, audience. So if you're entering the industry now, you know where to target. I love that. It's just like aim farther where the puck is going to be, not where it is now, in hockey terms. All right, we're going to transition, Marek, to something I like to call the under 30 seconds round. I'm going to fire off some questions, answer with the first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
What is the book you've gifted more often than any other book, and why?
I guess it would be Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel
Kahneman.
Yeah.
Great one. Why?
Why? Because it's a fascinating insight, or it's one that I keep going back to, almost even as a reference about human psychology and the two types of system thinking. So the primitive brain that makes a lot of snap judgments, and our logical minds that we all think that we are, but in fact, actually, we rarely use that brain as much as we think we do. We just do a lot of snap judgments and shortcuts. And recognizing those and our own biases and the way we're wired and set up, I think is like extremely useful actually as a skill to know and catch yourself when you're doing it. Helps, I guess, discipline yourself in terms of thought process and making sure that you are doing things in the right way. Even if it's just like, if you get an email, that your emotional reaction, if it's a nasty email, you want to just write straight back, right? And just respond.
Yes.
That's your first mind. And then sometimes you just have to say, look, I know that's my reaction. I know why I'm doing that. It's my my primitive mind. I need to go and cool off. I need to think about this and then approach it in a more rational, logical way.
Exactly. It's a great book, and also helps you understand first order consequences and second order consequences. And I always share this with some clients. An example of this, if you're listening and you don't understand, if you haven't read the book yet, essentially it's, if you go to work out at the gym, right? The first order consequence, it doesn't feel good. You're tired, you're sweating, you're might be upset because you have to work hard. That's a first order consequence. So if you make all your decisions based on first order consequences, the instant gratification, the primitive minded brain, you're always going to do things that are looking for that instant quick fix, that instant gratification. But if you look at going to the gym into the second order consequences, like, oh, after that workout, I felt good. The blood is flowing, dopamine's going up, serotonin's going up. I feel great. And then the third order consequence would be, my blood pressure goes down, my cardiovascular health improves, my weight, my adipose tissue goes down. So it's like thinking through these decisions you're making in first, second, and third order consequences. Great book. Thanks for sharing that. Number 2, what's one of the best investments and one of the worst investments you've ever made, and why?
Off the top of my head, one of the best investments, I would say, for the same sort of reason you just described, is my Apple Watch. Like I use it every day one, it's great for data collection. I use it all the time to make sure I'm getting the steps in, the calorie count in. So I found it hugely useful just for that. Data is in general useful, and it gathers a lot on me, that's probably the best investment. Worst, that's trickier. I guess one of the reflections of being in lockdown for 10 to 12 weeks is actually, and maybe this is a controversial one to say to you, particularly as a performance coach, is gym membership. Because I went and bought yoga mats and some weights, and it was a one-off investment. And I've been working out at home like a few times a week, both on my own. I go for runs, and then we do joint sessions with my girlfriend. And that has been like a one-off investment, and I'm using it again and again. And I don't think, if anything, I'm exercising more than I was before, because it's just more convenient. I don't have to go anywhere to go and do it. So
there you go. Hey, it works for some people. That works. And I'm a huge fan of just finding out what is more convenient for you, so you actually do it. You adhere to the behavior you're telling yourself to do. And I got the Apple Watch too, so I'm on the same page with you. And number 3, what's the most impactful thing you do in your morning routine, and the most impactful thing you do in your evening routine? The
morning routine is, I think, easy enough. I always make the bed. And I don't know if there's I can't remember the name, but there's one of the university college addresses. This is where I got the idea from. I can't remember the name of the
University of Texas, the commander of the Navy. He talks about the science behind start your day by making your bed every single morning, because what happens is you actually release dopamine and serotonin. And so it taps into that motivation side of the brain. So you're more likely to complete another task. So it begins this momentum train of just getting things done.
That's it. Yeah. Checklist. And as he says, like, if you have a shitty day and nothing goes your way, at least you can accomplish one task and you come back to a made bed. So yeah, I really like that philosophy and outlook, and I find it's like a great little trick to.
And what about the evening routine?
Evening routine. I think that's harder. One of the things that I try and do is not use my phone too close to bed. And I find, it's not necessarily phone use, it's work specifically on the phone, because like we're an international company. We have people in Australia, in the US,
different time zones,
all of the time zones. So there's emails coming in, and like the temptation is to read it. I really have to try and shut off, because otherwise I'm a bit of a workaholic. I will do the work, and then I find I can't sleep afterwards because your mind's triggered and it's just in a high energy state. So that that is probably the most obvious thing that I.
Yeah, my girlfriend and I, we keep our phone in the kitchen. Actually, we don't allow it in the bedroom. So it's a dramatic game changer for you. So pretend you won the Peter Thiel Fellowship and you were going to get money to start a business instead of go to college. What's the very first thing you do to start your new business?
Pick an idea, I guess. There's 2 or 3 different ones that if I had to pick outside of my industry, because we already sort of spoke a little bit about other things that could be done there. I would say that there's 3. One would be, I find it actually fascinating, but I feel I'm behind the curve on it already, is like the Beyond Meat burgers, and there's like basically vegan substitutes to meat that are as healthy, as tasty, and cheaper. Because if you can make something tastier, cheaper, and nicer than meat, then it solves it's the same sort of thing. It's like as I mentioned with the sort of, Greenpeace and energy companies, it's the equivalent. Like if, pizza for animals, yes. Rather than complain about people eating meat, you convince people actually, hey, this thing is better, and change it from the inside. That to me is much more impactful. So that could be one. Although obviously there's already some great products out there for that. The second, I'm a big aviation fan. So before COVID, I fly all over the place, and so sustainable aviation is another area that'd be really interesting to me. So I don't know whether it be electric planes or something in that sort of space.
Fluence flights. There you go.
This sub-brand.
There you go. Just like Virgin, he has Virgin Air, Virgin Music. Now we're going to have Fluence Air, Fluence Sun, Fluence Flights.
The third was, but again, it feels like Elon Musk's just a step ahead of me on this one, which was always like, I think the Mars idea is fascinating, but the other piece of it, and I don't know if he's focused on this as much, but from a resource standpoint, asteroid belt mining, there's a huge amount of money to be made in that for the first people who get to asteroid belts figure out how to get rare earth metals back to Earth, because it solves a huge constraint. It solves an ethics and supply chain issue of people working in mines and so on. If you can get that sort of industry rolling, you're probably looking at the world's first trillionaire.
There you go. Last question. What's something you never knew you needed?
Okay. There's a couple of apps. Apps are the first thing that jump into mind. Flight Radar, really useful one. As I said, big into aviation, and back when we were allowed in airports still. I found that a really useful discovery, because we used to look at just departure boards and see when flights are taking off, and they always update them the last minute, and you're always tense about whether you're going to have to rush to your gate or not. And Flight Radar, I found out you can track the plane and figure out where it is. So rather than waiting for the board to tell you that the flight's delayed, you can see, it hasn't landed yet, I've got plenty of time. So that's been one that I discovered that was hugely useful.
That's awesome.
The second one, I think it's specific to the Netherlands, but it's an app called DigID, which is basically like a government app that links everything together. And I've not heard of any other country or system doing this, but it's really cool. Basically, your social security identity is tied to your healthcare, to your whether it's dentist, your taxes, your municipality, to applications for things. So they all use this same digital footprint, and it's all tied in one place. So I found that also really.
Yeah, we need that. We need that here in the US. Marek, thank you so much for being here today. Such a pleasure. Before you go, what's next for you? What's the next big milestone, goal, or bucket list item you want to achieve?
Work related, we're sat here using the time very effectively on the offense to close contracts. We're sat here making business because we've got stuff in hand, and it's really good time to focus. Personally, I would love to get to country 60. I've been stuck on 59. I was going to break the barrier this year until everything shut down. So I'm hoping to get my next few countries under my belt as soon as travel eases. And maybe the Forbes summit was moved to December in Botswana. I'm hoping that still goes ahead, and that's my next personal milestone.
Awesome. Well, I'll see you there. Please, ladies and gentlemen, go connect with Marek. Where do listeners go to connect with you directly?
So I'm most active on LinkedIn as a platform. So if you just search my name, I should show up.
We'll put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah. And then other than that, Twitter is @ML Kubik, Kubik. I'm reasonably active on there. And if you want to connect a little bit more personally, then Instagram. And that is at Good Sophism, which I guess you'll put in the show notes as well.
Yes, as well. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. This is Marek with Fluence Energy, who makes renewable energy easier to connect to the grid so we can all enjoy its benefits. We learned so much today. We learned about Elon Musk's biggest competitor right here in the studio, Marek. We learned how to make sure you're connecting your renewable energy to the grid and how to reach out if you are an electric company. We learned what ideas you should be focusing on if you're even thinking about starting your new business or starting to get into the energy industry. Marek, thank you so much for being here today. It was such a pleasure.
No worries, man. Thanks, Phil. It's been great.
My pleasure. Hope this episode helped you as much as it helped me. Have an amazing day.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope this episode helped you as much as it helped me. Who do you think would benefit from hearing it? You can make an impact on their life by sharing it now. Before you go, I encourage you to tell us your favorite part of the episode in the review section. Now it's time to level up. Level up.